and medics up there. And I thought, well, this is gonna be all right. I'll get some schooling before I see any action with this. It wasn't too many days, and we hadn't had no schooling. And they called me into the main office. He said, "You're going up on the front line. The medic that was up there, he was killed. You're going up and replace him." So they gave me a little aid kit that had everything in I was going to need. I was supposed to go up in the mountains up there. So I got my M1 and my kit and my pack on my back. I reported in to the commander of the outfit up there, and in a few days we was out on patrol. And we picked up a little small arms firing. Just small wounds, nothing to speak of, and I doctored them like I knew everything about it. We come back to the camp, and these guys say, "This guy knows what he's doing. He doctors up, man, he knows. Well, I didn't tell them that I didn't know. We was in small battles and some bigger ones. I guess probably the worst one I ever got into, we had been fighting on Old Baldy, they called it. The next day we had orders we were going to take the next hill, and we did, and we lost a lot of lives that day. I had 8 men down at one time that could not move, and I had morphine with me so I could kind of kill the pain on them. I got them doctored and got them sent down on litters. I often wonder how many of them lived or if any of them did. I'm very proud that I served my country and so thankful that I never got a scratch.
All right, Dan back with another video here. Not talking in front of the camera because I've set my camera stand up in a way I think you'll get a better view of everything, and it took me a little bit to get it all to stay in position the way I wanted it, so I'm just gonna leave it be. But took a survey on what my next video should be. Choices were food packet, long range patrol, Korean War medic / Vietnam era medic bag, or a Remington rolling block rifle from the late 1800s Indian Wars era. And those 2 videos will be getting made soon, but top survey was the medic bag. Recently did the video on combat medic gear from World War II to the more present day, but that was prior to me obtaining this pretty much complete M3 medic bag from the mid-60s. However, this bag would have been representative of what a medic in the Korean War would have carried as well. And if you listen to the gentleman that I'm going to put in the intro on his experience as a medic, he talks about how he was kind of thrust into the role before he even got to complete training, which is crazy to think. I mean, in basic training, all soldiers learn first aid, but this was prior to Combat Lifesaver, which I'm going to make the subject of a 3rd video, I believe, because it's a whole other program, but it ties into how the situation for the medic is always improving. So he says he moves up to the line with his M1 rifle and his first aid kit, his medic bag that he was given. Typically, you don't think of a medic as carrying a rifle, but after World War II, even though the standard weapon for a medic was still a pistol, as we're not supposed to be engaging the enemy directly, we're supposed to defend our patients only, we realize that isn't always practical. So, and this gentleman was just a rifleman still. He was thrust into the role, as I said. So he moves up on the line with his M1. Here, this particular M1 is originally with a 1942 receiver, Korean War era barrel. But so this is period to the topic we're talking about. Over here to the left, you'll see a M43 patrol cap with a combat medic badge affixed to it. This was my grandfather's, who was a medic in the Korean War. So back here we have a PRC-6 handy talkie, a radio used for squad level communication during the Korean War and through Vietnam. The squads could use this to communicate between each other and back to the main radio man, and that could be used for the medic to communicate and call for assistance through his squad leader, who would more than likely have been carrying the handy-talkie. Here we have a B2 unit from the Korean War. This is part of the rations that would have been issued. This one has crackers, candy, and jam in it. I have a complete video on a Korean War ration combat individual on the channel. If you want to see more of that, check it out. Back here we have an M1952 era flak vest or body armor. You can see the label here. Armor Vest 1952A. It was made by Textron Inc. 12 February 1953. And Captain George F. Mold, Quartermaster Corps. So I imagine he was the inspector at the time who was, procuring and certifying these vests, I'm guessing. But that is something that body armor, such as that, which I have more in-depth videos on that on the channel as well, was something that really improved casualty survival rates from World War II. And we talked about that in my first video. World War II, they didn't really started to just experiment with body armor at the very end, and it got more mainstream through Korea and then into Vietnam, and now it's completely standard. But that certainly was one of the things that made wounds, eliminated wounds when the armor was completely successful in stopping projectile. But often it also reduced the severity of a wound, and obviously that is good news for everybody, especially the medic. So without further ado, we're going to move on to checking out the contents of the bag. So give me a minute to rearrange the table, and we'll explore the M3. Alright, so here we have the M3 medic bag. I believe these did make an appearance late in World War II. Saw a lot of use in Korea, and as I said, they were used in through Vietnam as well, but larger medic bags kind of started to be phased in during the Vietnam era. Eventually these were kind of completely phased out as a medic's bag, and a very similar but slightly larger design would become the CLS bag. Like I said, it's Combat Lifesaver and Tactical Combat Casualty Care, TC3, was something that developed after Vietnam, and that'll be a subject of a later video, but keep this bag in mind as it'll look very familiar. So you have a simple lift the dot snap closure here. Of course, this one is a little stiff and I was pulling it the wrong way. You can tighten that down. I kind of think you could use that strap to maybe secure an extra pouch on the outside, maybe have a tourniquet or something quick there. That's the modern medic in me thinking anyway. But it's made of a rubberized duck cotton material to keep everything dry inside. And if we open it up, inside we can see that this particular example by the contract date is dated 1966, and it says case, medical instrument and supply set, non-rigid, number 3, empty. So the bag itself is provided through the military as an empty set, and then usually your medics would be in charge of filling these at headquarters level. Like I was in headquarters company, 1st 145 Armor, and one of our jobs when not much was going on was going through both the medic bags and the Combat Lifesaver bags and ensuring they were properly stocked and ready to go at any time. So this bag, like I said, would have arrived empty and then would have been filled as necessary. So you got a series of pouches here, 3 pouches that fold together. We'll open the first one and let's see what we have inside. So here we go. We have some adhesive tape, good old 3-inch medical tape in a steel can, kind of neat. 5 yards of that, and have a funny story about 3-inch medical tape. So when you go through medic school, at least back in 08 when I went through, one of the final assessments is you're in a cubicle and they got the heat cranked up and music blasting, and you have to go through your full trauma assessment, including giving an IV, and once you pass, you become the patient, the person that gets to be stuck and all of that after you've passed. So I had passed, and I'm laying there, and the procedure then, it probably hasn't changed, is if you miss twice giving an IV, you go to what's called external IO, which is an IV that is pushed into the bone of your chest. Now that didn't happen to me. We had a practice one, and there's a little target patch that goes on your sternum, and it sticks down, and that's your guide for where you shove this big needle in. So the guy I was testing with, you know, he's nervous. He misses twice. I don't have great veins, so probably my fault, but he sticks the target patch down, and the instructor, seeing that I have a rather hairy chest, goes, "Don't forget the 3-inch tape." So he proceeds to secure that already adhesive target patch to my chest with 3-inch tape, and I got a free waxing that day like 40-year-old virgin. So whenever I see 3-inch medical tape, I always will remember that story. We have several first aid dressings here, 4-inch by 7-inch, all plastic. Pretty neat. You can see that. So the Lily White Sales Company, Inc., New York, New York. Sterile is not guaranteed if inner wrapper is damaged. Dressing first aid field, camouflaged, 4 by 7 inches, sterilized. Red color indicates back of dressing. Put other side next to wound. So it gives you straightforward instructions on how to apply that to the wound. And those dressings have tails on them, and you can tighten them down, and you can use the extra tail to make a windlass that you use to apply even more pressure to that dressing in the event of heavy bleeding. So we have a total of 2, 4, 6 dressings and some tape in that first pouch. So we'll go into our secondary pouch. Now here looks like we got some more medicines, different items. So let's see here. This looks like a triangular gauze bandage for making a splint. It does not label, but judging by the rough texture of the fabric, you can't really pick that up on camera. I believe it's a triangular dressing. See, that's another one. That's a triangular dressing for sure. These are great for making improvised tourniquets. If you got popsicle sticks and a triangular dressing, you can make improvised tourniquets. So that's always great to have. Obviously, you can make slings out of them. Here is a opened field dressing. So at some point, someone grabbed something out of here, and they stuck. Well, you know what it is. I think these are Band-Aids. So that's pretty smart. At some point, they used the dressing, and they kept this to keep their Band-Aids dry. So as a medic, you know, your job is obviously to take care of the wounded when that happens, but you're a multi-purpose, you know, you're doc, you know, your job, boo-boos, ailments, you know, someone might just need a Band-Aid, someone might be sick and have a stomach ache. So you kind of have to carry a variety of stuff, and this is why medic bags did get bigger with time, because you kind of have to cover all bases. Here's an adhesive bandage. So, like a giant Band-Aid. Let's open that up. This one's dated 1967. It's made by Kendall. Kendall actually also makes, they're an Ohio company. At least part of their divisions are, because I have Kendall milk filters on the farm. But this is the healthcare division. And it says Chicago, Illinois, made in USA. But their animal health division is in Ohio. So that's kind of neat. Directions: cleanse wound, apply bandage, placing pad over wound. Do not apply too tightly. For best results, be sure skin is clean and dry before applying bandage. Good medical practice suggests changing the bandage if pad becomes wet. And then it just has some more information there. But see, everything has instructions. So even in a basic soldier's first aid kit, these items could be used without a whole lot of training. There we go. So this is a 3-inch bandage, gauze compressed. This is rolled gauze. Field brown, sterile, made by Mar Sales Company, Inc., 302 Broadway, New York City. Someone look up that address and see what's there now. I suspect that Mar Sales Company, Inc. is no longer there. 320 Broadway, New York City. So, there's that. There's another roll of that gauze. Rolled gauze is great to have for packing wounds and many other uses. And then we have some vials here. Now let's see what we have. Oh, okay, interesting. Benzalconium chloride tincture tinted alcohol. Apply a small amount to shallow cuts, stitches. So this is a topical like antiseptic. Never heard of that formula before. It wasn't something I encountered in medic school. Directions: remove cap, lightly touch pointed end of applicator bottle to injury. If larger flow of antiseptic is required, gently tap bottom of inverted bottle. For external use only. Medical Supplies Company, Rockford, Illinois. Savoy Drug and Chemical Company. So that's a pretty neat little thing. It's in there. It's kind of tightly snugged into that cardboard tube after all these years, but if you look, it still has the liquid in it. It is still in there, and it has these little holes, I think, so you can tell how much is left. So I don't think it's really meant to come out of the sleeve, but that's really cool. It's a glass vial. Very neat. That sort of stuff is hard to come by. And it looks like there's a total of 3 of those antiseptic vials in here. They're all the same. Yep, all the same stuff there. But, I mean, yeah, that's something you would use quite a bit, especially in Vietnam, hot tropical environment. A lot of foreign pathogens, so infection would be a real problem. There's also an additional pouch here, which I believe is where your surgical instrument kit goes. So we might as well check that out. Nathan Products Corp., New York, USA. It's interesting. Almost everything in this bag is either from Chicago or New York. The centers of American industry, at one point in time, when back when America made things. On the back, you got the U.S. Medical Corps logo. But in here, we have stuff to perform minor surgery, which is something a more advanced medic will learn, especially if you have a physician's assistant or nurse in your medical platoon. But still great things to have here. We have some scissors, cut your gauze, clamps. Always good to have clamps if you need to try to stop some bleeding or pinch off a line, like for an IV bag, because the old original ones didn't have like the fancy clamps like we have now. Tweezers, always good to have tweezers. And then of course we have stitches in here. Now I never learned how to do stitches myself, but it is something that medics will learn just on a case-to-case basis. So I never learned it, but we did have a PA in our unit, so he would have handled more of that sort of stuff back at the battalion aid station. So that kind of stuff's in there. And now we'll go to our top pouch. Okay, so what do we have in our top pouch? Oh, this is kind of neat. Wow, we have a big roll of like hardware cloth, chicken wire type mesh, which this kind of like an early version of a SAM splint, I think. You could probably use this to make a cast or make a splint, a more rigid splint. Kind of neat. Never seen anything like that before in a medical kit. So, but this is from a long time ago, so stuff that back in there. Here we have a tourniquet. Now, if you remember in the first video, if you watched it, I talked about the early tourniquets and how they were kind of just a fabric strap. And this is one of those. And it says tourniquet, non-pneumatic, camouflaged. And if you look, it's kind of hard to tell, unfortunately, but there is like a metal belt buckle type clasp here. So you would tighten that down, and that would be your tourniquet, which is definitely, medics always carry tourniquets. So, and usually several. You're going to need more than one, if things get real ugly, unfortunately. So here we go. We have some larger field dressings. Dressing, first aid field, dyed, sterilized dressing, just like the other one. The red indicates put on the back side of the dressing. This one's made by Bay Division Park Davis and Company, Bridgeport, Connecticut. So, hey, it's something not from New York or Chicago. And it looks like we got 2 of those in here. And then This is a large, like what we would call an abdominal dressing, and this would be used if someone was eviscerated or like they had a stomach wound and some of their intestines are showing. You'd use a large dressing like this. You'd wet this down with, hopefully, you'd have some sterile saline, if not water, and you put that over that and keep everything wet and covered until they can get in for surgery. So dressing, first aid, field, 11 3/4 inches square. So, you know, it's almost a foot square. It's a big dressing. And once again, made by Bay Division, Bridgeport, Connecticut. And there's one more item in here. And, oh, this is a, oh wow, look at that. This is a very early airway intubation. I didn't know they had airways back. This is a pharyngeal airway. That's really cool to see. I didn't know they had pharyngeal airways back in this era. I wonder if there's a contract date on it. There are instructions. Here's the instruction packet. Scott, the direct breathing resuscitation using the Scott airway. Never heard of that. I've heard of a pharyngeal airway, and I've trained to use these, but never seen one quite this style or this old, or that referred to as a Scott airway. But you can see you're going to intubate the patient, okay, by doing a head tilt chin lift. You're going to get the airway down their throat, and then you're going to breathe down. That's going to seal over their mouth. We had a couple different airways like this to intubate with that were when I trained, and definitely can be a lifesaver. But there's very specific circumstances which you have to use that. So I don't know. There's no date, but it definitely looks vintage, and that's definitely something. Meaning this is a plastic and a more advanced item. This is not something you would have had in the Korean War. But this sort of, with the advance of medical plastics in the 60s, 70s, things that came on in Vietnam and later, and once again, this is kind of early advanced technology that World War II and Korean War medics didn't have. The most Korean War medic could do would be to do like a cricothyroidotomy, where they would cut the throat and use maybe like a pen to intubate to get air down past the blockage in the throat. And so this would have been a big advancement, and it's definitely vintage. There's no date on it, but it does have an FSN number on it at the top. So this was government issue, and you always know government issue because of the way the nomenclature is: airway, pharyngeal, plastic. So that's really cool. Did not expect to find that in there, and that's a neat item of early Cold War 60s era medical technology. So and that about wraps up this medic bag. Yep, there's nothing else in here. But like I said, with the exception of the pharyngeal airway, that is what a medic in the Korean War pretty much would have had, and you know, throughout Vietnam as well. But the only thing missing really in this kit is fluids. In that bag, there's no room for IVs, and regardless, they definitely would have been carrying IVs in some other pouch in their field pack, what have you. You always need to have fluids in the event of trauma or dehydration. Dehydration being a big issue in Vietnam, especially if you were in a unit that was wearing body armor. Not all units wore it because of the heat, but some units required it, and it was just hot and miserable. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon with some more videos.